This is the part 2 of making Crochet Jagannath Swami project. In part 1, we have already completed making the head part of this project. We'll continue the rest of the pattern and complete it by the end of this tutorial. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to DIY Crafts. Now let's begin the body part of our project. I'm using a blue color 100% fine weight cotton yarn and a 2.5 mm crochet hook. Let's begin with the magic ring as usual. Then make chain 1 and now in the center make 8 single crochet stitches. Insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and single crochet. So if you want to identify the first stitch of every row, put a stitch marker on the top of the first stitch. And now let's continue with the rest of the single crochet stitches. Now that's the second single stitch. Then the third one, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Now pull the starting tail end to close the magic ring. As we have 8 stitches, this circle will be little big compared to the circle that we have done for the head part. Now insert your hook onto the top of the first stitch and let's start making round 2. So for round 2 we have to make increase in each and every stitch. We'll begin with 1 single crochet and then put the stitch marker in this first stitch to mark the beginning of the second row. Now into the same stitch, insert your hook again and make another single stitch. Now these 2 single stitches together we call it as an increase. Now in the next stitch we'll make another increase. Likewise we will continue to make increases in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So if we have done increases in all the 8 stitches, by the end of the second row we'll have 16 single crochet stitches. So this is the last increase of the second row and this is the shape of the project. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the third row. Begin with 1 single stitch and then put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of the first stitch in the third row. And now the pattern for the third row is 1 single stitch and 1 increase. As we have already completed making 1 single stitch, in the next stitch I am making 1 increase. And this pattern has to be repeated a total of 8 times. Here I am doing it for the second time. So 1 single stitch and now 1 single stitch increase. That is the second repetition. 1 stitch and 1 increase. And this is the same set of instructions we have to repeat throughout the row until you reach the starting point, which is total repetitions of 8 times. So here I have completed the last increase and by the end of the third row we will have 24 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the row 4. So for the row 4 I am going to begin with 1 single stitch. Put the big stitch marker on this first stitch to mark the beginning of the 4th row. And now in the next stitch make an increase. That is 2 single stitches in the same stitch. That's an increase. And then in the next stitch make 1 single crochet. So this is the first set, 1 stitch increase and 1 stitch. This is the set of stitches which we have to repeat 8 times. So 1 single stitch, increase, again 1 single stitch. This is the second repetition. 1 stitch increase and 1 stitch, and likewise repeat it for 6 more times until you reach the starting point. And by the end of the 4th row you will have 32 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making row 5. Make 1 single stitch, put the stitch marker back in this first stitch to mark the beginning of the 5th row. And now for the 5th row the pattern is 32 single stitch. In other words, we have to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch. As in the row 4 we have 32 single stitch. In row 5, as we are making 1 stitch in each stitch, we will have the same 32 single stitches. Continue this until the starting point and you will see that you will have 32 single stitches in the row 5. So this is the shape. It will be flat like a round as a base of our project. Now for the next row, until we build the body, we are going to have a slight modification here. So in the next stitch, make one slip stitch, and this is a dummy stitch. It doesn't have any count. It's just a stitch that we use to give the detailing that is needed for our project. Now we are going to start the 6th row. Put your needle in the back loop of the next stitch and then make a single stitch. Now this is the first stitch of our 6th row. Put a stitch marker in this one. We can ignore the slip stitch that we have done in the previous stitch. That also will be a part of our row 5. And now we will continue to make one single stitch in each and every stitch, but remember to put the needle only into the back loop and continue throughout the row. That means in the 6th row also we will have 32 single stitches, whereas we are leaving the front loops, which will give a border kind of line for our project. And this little detail helps us to separate the project in between the base and the body of our project. So here I am completing the last but one single stitch, and now I am putting the needle into the back loop of the previous slip stitch that we have made. So this way it helps us to give the neat line partition in between the base and the side of your project. Now remove the stitch marker and let's continue with the 7th row. Make one single stitch and then put the stitch marker back. And now from row 7 till row 12 we are supposed to make only one single stitch in each and every stitch until you complete the 12th row, and this will have the body part. And in all the rows we will have 32 single stitches in each and every row. Here, before I continue with the rest of the project, we have to add a little sturdiness to the base of the project to make it stand well. So for that I am using 1 mm foam sheet. You can use cardboard also. Cut it in a circle shape that fits the base of the project and attach it with the help of some glue. You can use hot glue or fabric glues for this purpose. Let it dry completely before you continue with the rest of the project. Now after completing until row 12, this is how the project should look. It looks like a little basket shape. And now let's continue with the 13th row. Again, remove the stitch marker and we will add one more dummy stitch of a slip stitch here. Insert the hook and make a slip stitch. So that is a dummy stitch. We are not counting it as a stitch. Now from the next stitch, we are putting the needle in the back loop to make a single crochet stitch. Begin with one single stitch, put the stitch marker, and this marks the beginning of the 13th row. And now continue to make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point. But remember, put the needle only into the back loop. So BLO in the written pattern represents back loop only. So the last stitch of the 13th row will be on the slip stitch. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 14th row. And in the 13th row, whatever front loops we have left, that is where we are going to continue the dress part of our project. So make a note of that. Now for the 14th row, we are going to make one stitch in each and every stitch, and we are going to continue this pattern until 18th row. So for the next 4 rows, we are going to make one stitch in each stitch, and this is the shape of the project after completing 18 rows. See this middle line? That is because of we worked in the back loop only in the 13th row. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 19th row. Begin with one single stitch and put the stitch marker back. And now the pattern for 19th row is 2 single stitch and 1 decrease. So that's the second single stitch. And then in the next 2 stitches we are going to make an invisible decrease. So for this, insert the needle into front loops of the next 2 stitches and then make a single stitch. So this is the same invisible decrease that we have used for making a decreases in the head part. So I'm just kind of making it little faster. Now the second repetition, again 2 single stitch and again 1 invisible decrease. And this is the second repetition, and we are going to continue it throughout the row until we have done the 8 repetitions. And by the end of the 19th row, the shape will come a little closer because of the decreases, and you will have 24 single stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 20th row. Begin with one single stitch. Put the stitch marker back, and this marks the beginning of the 20th row. Carefully observe the pattern. For the 20th row, it's one single stitch, decrease and one single stitch. As one single stitch is already completed, this is one decrease. and then make one single stitch. This is the first repetition of 20th row. One stitch decrease and one stitch, and this pattern we have to repeat for 6 times. So this is the second repetition. One single stitch, one invisible decrease, and then one single stitch. So that is the second repetition. And now we will continue this pattern of one stitch decrease and one stitch throughout the row until the starting point, and we will have total of 6 repetitions. Make the last single stitch, and now we have to cut the yarn to make the finishings. Now for this part we have to leave a long tail end, and we are going to use this tail end to attach the body to the head part. Now to get the neat finishings, try to close the project as I show in the video. You can even make a chain one and fasten off, but this kind of join helps us to have a clear finish, neat finishings for the project. Take the finishing tail end into your tapestry needle, leave the next stitch, and in the latest stitch put your needle from front to back and pull it gently. Now put your needle back into the last stitch and into the last bump of the last stitch and pull it out, and this will give you a cleaner finish on the last row. And now make a knot on the inside of your project. Don't trim the thread, you will just have it still attached to the project. Now with this the base of the project is completed. Now let's work on the dress part. For this we are going to use the front loops that we have left while working the row 13. You can put your needle into any of the stitches, but make sure that the opening part of the body is facing to the downwards while you are putting your needle. So this is how you put your needle into any of the loops of the 13th row, and then attach the yarn, and I'm attaching the same color or that to match the dress part of the project. Now attach the yarn and make chain 2, and the chain 2 at the start of every row is ignored as a stitch. It's just a height stitch that we are going to use. Now I'm making one single stitch in the first stitch. If needed, you can put a stitch marker on top of this first stitch. If not, you can ignore. Like if you are able to identify the first double stitch, then no need to put the stitch marker. Now for this row I'm going to make a double crochet in the next stitch as well. So that's the second double stitch, then the third double stitch. So that's 1, 2 and 3 double crochet, and then in the next stitch I'm going to make an increase, that is 2 single stitches in the same stitch. So 1 and another double crochet. And now I'm going to repeat this pattern of 3 DC and a DC increase throughout the row. So let's continue. If you want to include the starting tail end through the front loops, you can do that, or you can weave in them at the end of the project. Now continue this the pattern until the last stitch. Once you are done with the last increase, here I'm making the DC increase of the last repetition. Remove the stitch marker, and now insert your hook into that stitch to make a slip stitch. So this is the first row of the dress part, and now let's continue for the second row. Again begin with chain 2, and we are ignoring that one, and for this row we are going to make 4 DC and an increase. So that's second DC, this is the third one. If you want, again you can put a stitch marker on the first stitch, and this is the fourth one. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. After 4 DC, in the next stitch we are making an increase, that is again 2 DCs into the same stitch. And now repeat this pattern of 4 DC increase in throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So here I am making the last increase, and this completes the second row of the dress part. Make a slip stitch onto the first double crochet. So you'll have 48 double stitches. Now chain 2, and let's start making the third row. Make 1 DC in each stitch. Again chain 2, and we'll ignore that DC, and 1 DC in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point. As we have 48 double stitches in row 2, in row 3 also we will have same 48 double stitches. So here I am making the last DC of my third row, and then make a slip stitch onto the first double crochet. Third row is completed, and for the fourth row I am making a frill with a nice detailing part on the last row as a frills. So for that part I am starting with a chain 2, and now for each frill I am making 5 DC shell, that is 5 double crochet stitches in the same stitch. So that's 1 double stitch, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now after 5 double crochet I am going to skip the next 2 stitches, so 1 and 2, and then in the next stitch make 1 single stitch. Again for the next shell stitch ignore the next 2 stitches, and in the later stitch make 5 more double crochet stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Again next 2 stitches we will ignore, and in the later stitch make 1 single stitch. Ignore the next 2 stitches, and in the later stitch again make a 5 DC shell stitch, and we are going to repeat this pattern throughout the row until you come to the starting stitch. After making the last single crochet, we are going to skip the next 2 stitches and make a slip stitch on the top of the first DC, and this completes the dress part. So chain 1 and trim the excess yarn, leaving a tail end of 3 to 4 inches. And now we have to weave in all the tail ends, the starting tail end and the finishing tail end of the dress part. Complete it and put it aside, and now let's start working on the hands part of our project. Begin with a magic circle, and I'm using the same gray color yarn that I have used for the face part. If you are using a black color yarn, try to make sure you use the same color. And now in the center make 6 single crochet stitches. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So in the hands part we are working in a row wise for first 2 rows, and from the third row we will work in the spiral method. So after completing the 6 single stitches of the first row, insert your needle onto the first stitch and make a slip stitch to combine the row. Now for the second row, begin with chain 1, and we will ignore that chain 1 as a stitch. Make 1 single stitch in the first stitch, and then in the next stitch make 1 increase, and we are going to repeat this pattern of 1 stitch and 1 increase throughout the row for 3 times. So let's continue. 1 single stitch and then 1 increase in the next stitch, 1 and 2. That's the second repetition. And then the third repetition, 1 single stitch, and in the next stitch make 1 increase. The next stitch that you are watching here is the slip stitch, and we are going to ignore that one. Now directly put your needle onto the first stitch where you have done 1 single stitch, which is the chain 1 and the single stitch. Put your needle in that one and then make a slip stitch. Don't get confused and don't make any stitches on top of the slip stitches. Now tighten the stitch, make chain 1, and for the third row we are using only back loops to make the single crochet stitches. So here we need to put a stitch marker on the top of the first single stitch. As we are working in spirals starting from row 3, it is important for us to put a stitch marker in the first stitch whenever we start a new row. So for the third row we have to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch, while putting the needle only into the back loops, leaving the front loops. And whatever front loops we are leaving, it acts as a nice border thing for our project, and it will give you the nice shape and detailing that is needed for the hands part of this project. Now after completing the third row, which is 9 single stitches, let's continue making the fourth row, that is 1 single stitch in each and every stitch. Make 1 stitch for the fourth row and put a stitch marker back, and then continue to make 1 single stitch for the fourth row. Once we are done with the fourth row of 9 single stitches, that is the base part, and this is the side part of the hand. Here I am making the last single stitch of the fourth row, and before you finish the fourth row, the last single stitch, we are going to complete it with a new color, which means we are changing the color for our rest of the hand project. Just take a loop and complete the previous single stitch with the new color. Now remove the stitch marker, and with this changed color we are going to continue with the rest of the hand pattern, which is the fifth row. So insert your hook into the first stitch, make 1 single stitch, and then put the stitch marker back, and this marks the beginning of the fifth row. And now for the fifth row we are going to continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch. After making couple of rows, you can cut and trim the thread that is there from the previous color, and then you can continue with the rest of the pattern for row 5 until row 11. Continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row, which means until row 11 you will have 9 single stitches in each row. Once you have done with until the 11th row, it looks like the project as shown in the video. And now let's add the stuffing to this project. So as it is a thin and elongated piece, I am using a forceps, the tweezers to insert the stuffing into the project. You don't have to add too much of stuffing, just enough for it to hold the shape of the hand. Now remove the stitch marker and let's do the 12th row. Now for the 12th row we have to fold and do the stitching, so observe it really very careful while I show you this part. We are going to fold it, and now insert the needle into the first single stitch and into the 8th single stitch. You can ignore the 9th one, and it doesn't make much of a difference. So into the first and the 8th single stitch, insert your hook at the same time, pull up a loop and make a single stitch. So that is the first single stitch. And now into the 2nd and 7th single stitches, make your second single stitch. And now into the 3rd and the 6th one, put your needle at a time and make the 3rd single stitch. And now into the 4th and 5th ones, you are making the last single crochet for the 12th row, that is 4th single stitch. So this is how you will get 4 single stitch for your 12th row, and this is kind of a finishing that will give you the neat assembly while you are combining the parts of your project. Now chain 1, cut the yarn and pull up the loop, and this completes the first hand. Now use the same pattern from row 1 to row 12 and make another identical piece that makes the second hand for the project. Now put them aside, and now let's start working on the jewelry for the project. I'm using the metallic yarn and 1 mm crochet hook. You can use your favorite yarn for this part of the project, and this part of the jewelry is completely optional. You can decorate your project however you like, but for my project what I'm doing is I'm making a long chains, and here after completing the half of the chain length, I'm making one simple slip stitch with chain 4 or chain 5, and this little loop acts as a dollar for the chain, and then I'm continuing with the same number of chains on the other side of the jewelry. So this part will look like a little necklace, and I'm using the similar pattern with the longer chains for the waistband part. And again I'm using the same pattern with the white color cotton yarn, and this makes a garland for my project, and I'm making it super lengthy to make it fit until the height of the project. And now to give the detailing for the garland, I'm using few colored sketch pens, and I'm drawing it over the over the garland, making it look like a flower garland. The red color making it look like roses, and the green color making it look like leaves, and just decorating it on the top and bottom at few parts of the garland. And again you can customize this garland however you want your decorations to be. So once this decorations are all completed, so my sketch pens are kind of leaving the stain on my hands as well, so I have to be really careful while doing this part of the project. Now let's all put the parts together and let's assemble it together. First, let's start the assembling process by attaching the body and the head parts together. First, take out the yarn from one of the stitch of the body, and now put the face on top of the body and align the stitches with each other. Once you got the proper position, now insert your needle into the front loop of one of the stitches on the face part and bring it down. Now insert your needle into the next stitch front loop. Now this will make a little triangle. Now in the next stitch, we put your needle from the bottom to top in the next stitches of both body and the face. And for the next stitch, from the face to the body in the next stitches, and again in the front loops. And this forms the next attaching part. And now gently pull the thread so that both the parts will come together and each part will be attached with the other. And we are going to repeat this pattern throughout the last rows of both face and the body. And once we have done like almost completed with the attaching part, you can just check whether the stuffing part is proper or not. If not, you can just add a little bit of more stuffing in this part to make the shape have a proper stability instead of a wobbly head. Once it is done, you can attach the last few stitches together, and then we can make a secured knot to make the joint secure. You can give it a gentle pull after completing attaching both the parts together. Make one final knot for this, and now bring this thread to the back side of the neck and make another knot on the back side of the neck as well to make it extra secure. And once it is done, you can just insert the excess thread into the stuffing and then cut the tail end close to the project. So this completes the assembling part of the body with the head. And now for the hands part, we have to be really careful before you attach them. So to first check the positions of the hands by putting the pins just as I shown in the video. I'm using a few pearl head pins just to make sure that the position of the hands are very proper before I go ahead and attach them. And now I put a little bit of fabric glue in between the hands and the body to secure the position, and let it dry completely before I start attaching it. Once the glue is dried completely, you can remove the pearl head pins and then continue with the stitching part. So insert the needle and pull it out from the other end of the hand. Now let's attach these two parts just by sewing them together. You can just follow the same instructions that I have used while sewing the parts together that I'm showing in the video. After sewing them both with each other, grab hold of any of one of the nearby loops and secure the joint by making a simple knot, and then insert the excess thread into the project. And now trim the thread close to the project, and just how we have attached the first hand, attach the second hand as well. Now for assembling the jewelry, I am using the longer chain to attach it at the waist belt and just making a few knots on the back side of the project, and then align it across the face, like this dollar of the waist belt, the dollar of the necklace should be in line with the project, and then make a simple knots on the back side of the project. And for the garland as well, just put it on your project, adjust the length where you have to attach it properly, and then make couple of knots on the back side. Now to secure everything in its place, I'm using hot glue gun, and I'm securing all the tail ends, all the jewelry, the front part, the back part, and wherever I don't want the moving parts. At those places, I'm attaching it with the hot glue gun, and this will give you the nice finishings for my project, and the project looks neat and sturdy. Now put all the excess threads into the stuffing and then trim the excess threads close to the project. So now the project is almost complete except for one small detail, that is the peacock feather. Now let's continue and start making the peacock feather. For this I am using cotton embroidery threads and a 1 mm crochet hook. Now let's start with the yellow color yarn. Begin with a magic ring. Adjust the loop, make chain 1. And now let's start making the first row. We have to make 6 single stitches in the center. Insert the hook into the center, make 1 single stitch. That's 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. As the threads are very tiny, it might be difficult for you to see the stitches, but try to follow the video as long as it is possible. Now close the magic ring and now put the needle onto the first single stitch before you do the slip stitch. Now leave the yellow color yarn and take a blue color yarn. And here we are doing a color change. Now put this blue color yarn on the crochet hook and pull this thread out of the first stitch and also from the loop on the hook. That is the slip stitch, which means we have changed the color while we are making the slip stitch. Now chain 1 and let's start making the second row. For the second row we are making a single crochet increase, that is 2 single stitches in each and every stitch. So that is the first increase. Now we are doing the second increase. Do not have to include the tail ends, let them be on the back side of the project itself. We will secure it at the end of the project with the hot glue gun. We don't have to weave in all the tail ends. Since the project is very small, it can get really difficult. Now after completing all the 12 single stitches, make the slip stitch with a new color yarn, and here I am using green color thread. Now pull the green color yarn out of the first single stitch and also from the loop on the hook. Now gently pull the blue color yarn to make the joint tight and secure. Now chain 1 and let's start making the third row. It is little difficult pattern. Just try to follow the pattern as you stitch along the video. Make 1 single stitch and in the next stitch make single stitch increase. And now we repeat this pattern of 1 single stitch and increase one more time. So that's 1 single stitch and 1 single stitch increase in the next stitch. Now in the next stitch make 1 single stitch. Then in the later stitch make a half double crochet increase, that is 2 HDC into the same stitch. So that's first half double stitch, and in the same stitch another half double stitch. That's a HDC increase. Now in the next stitch we are making a double crochet. So that's the double stitch, and now make chain 1 and then make a picot stitch. Put your needle into the double crochet and make a slip stitch. So that's a picot stitch. And now continue the pattern for the rest of the peacock feather. Make a half double crochet increase, yarn over, and that's the first half double stitch, and in the same stitch make another half double stitch. So that's a HDC increase, and this forms the tip of the peacock feather. And now continue 1 single stitch, then 1 single stitch increase in the next stitch, again 1 single stitch and 1 single stitch increase in the last stitch. Once it is completed, put your needle onto the first stitch and make a slip stitch. Now chain 1 and cut the yarn, leaving a tail end of approximately 3 to 4 inches. Fasten off, and now pull the loop on the hook out completely to make a knot. And then you can cut all the starting tail ends and finishing tail ends from the previous colors by leaving a tail ends of approximately half an inch to 1 inch, not more than that. The tail ends should be good enough for us to hide them on the back side of the feather itself, not more than that. Now I am taking a small piece of flower wire and just fold it in half and twisted it along the stem so that it gives a little sturdiness to the feather. And now I'm fixing all the tail ends using a bit of a glue on the back side and fixing them at the center. Now identify the center part and fix the flowers wire at the middle of the peacock feather. And now wrap this green color yarn around the stem until it covers the flower stem with the green color, and then trim the excess thread. Now the peacock feather is completed. Let's decorate it to our Lord Jagannath. So put it on the crown, position it properly and fix it, and that's it. Your beautiful Crochet Jagannath Swami pattern is now completed. I hope you all enjoyed watching this tutorial. Do give this pattern a try and let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. The written pattern for this project is given in the description. Do check it out. Don't forget to share your work to me on Instagram. See you all in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, share it and subscribe to DIY Crafts.